Hey guys, today I thought I would do something a little bit different in terms of how I edit my videos. Show you the final reveal at the end of everything. Let me know what you think about this style and waiting until the end to see the grand reveal of everything. I think it's kind of exciting to mix it up from time to time. But today we are doing the Makeover May series, which my friend Brandy over at the DIY Struggle does every single year, and I always participate with her. So that's what we're doing today, giving some of these old thrifted items a new life. These are the 3 items we're making over this year for Makeover May, and the theme this week is boho, which is a style that I love. However, I'm putting a little twist on it and making these pieces look more vintage and aged as opposed to the more modern boho style you think of today. I'm starting out with a large vessel, and I don't love the straw-like material that's wrapped around the top of it. It's also broken in an area, so I'm gonna remove this. I was able to easily cut through it with a utility knife and start peeling it off. Most of the straw came off with the help of a multi-tool to scrape it. However, there are some areas where the adhesive was pretty strong and I wasn't able to get everything off. I needed to break down the adhesive in order to get all that residue off. So to do this, I got out my goof off and a microfiber towel. I soaked the towel in the goof off and let that sit for a few minutes to break down the glue. I always forget to move my camera arm when I do shots like this. That's that little black thing that's hanging down and keeps covering my head. While the glue soaks, I'm moving on to the salad bowl. Last year, I used the rest of the salad bowl set to create these trendy vases, and now I'm using the larger bowl. First, I want to paint it white in preparation for the next step. Now, I made a big mistake here and completely forgot to sand the bowl down first. In the end, it worked out fine, but don't make that mistake if you need to paint over a wooden piece that has a glossy finish or a sealant on it. I also just used an acrylic gesso when I probably should have used my slick stick or a better primer. While I finish painting this, I want to share my inspiration for today's video, which came from Atelier. If you haven't heard of Atelier yet, it is a new retailer that is changing up the way people shop. The owners hand-source their products from countries around the world to find authentic, aged, and vintage items. They're located near Los Angeles, and they only open to the public 1 day a week. They also don't sell online, so unless you live in that area or take a trip out there, you cannot get your hands on these pieces. They have created such a cult following and high demand for their unique items, so since I live literally on the opposite side of the country, I've decided to try and dupe a few for myself. Okay, back to the projects at hand. The goof off has had some time to soak in and break down that glue. I was able to scrape it away much easier now. Eventually I did get out a razor blade, which worked a little bit better than the multi-tool, but I had to work my way around section by section, letting it soak and then scrape it off. If you need to do something like this, make sure you work in a well-ventilated room. I had all of my doors and windows open. Now we need to start working on the rocking horse. The shape of the horse seat was absolutely perfect for what I had in mind here. So I need to remove the rocker base as well as the horse head and his tail. Sorry, little guy. If you haven't guessed yet, I'm turning this into a little stool. I really love the bleached wood stools I've seen from Atelier, and while this one is not quite the same as theirs, I love the shape of it. But to get that light wood look, I need to remove the legs and sand everything down. I numbered the legs so I knew where to put them back, and then I removed them. I wanted to fill the screw holes in so the top is a little bit flatter. I had a dowel that was the perfect size to fit. I just need to clean up the holes a little bit. This rocking horse seems like it was pretty old and that wood was rough. So I used a 3/8 inch spade bit to clear out the holes and then cut down bits of the dowel. I made them longer than I needed to so I can flush cut them off later. Then I added wood glue into the holes and made sure to spread it all around with a paintbrush. I popped the dowel in so it was nice and snug and then set this aside to dry. Like I mentioned at the beginning, today's video is part of the Makeover May series presented by the DIY Struggle. In this series, we take thrifted items and give them a new life, and each week has a new theme. There's also a giveaway, and if you're interested in a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, come back to the playlist every Friday and watch out for each creator's code word. Now don't put that code word down in the comments, jot it down and collect them all. On May 27th, 2023, Brandy will share this post in her community tab where you'll comment yes if you've collected all of the code words to be entered in the giveaway. The entry window closes on June 1st, 2023, and Brandy will contact the winner on June 2nd, asking for all of the code words in order to win. Check out my description box for even more details. You know, sometimes I just really don't think when I'm doing a project. So I got the gesso, I got 2 coats of the gesso on the large salad bowl. Then I bumped it while it was like semi-dry, and part of it was dry, and that paint came right off because I didn't sand it. I always think to give things a scuff sand. Didn't think about that for this one for whatever reason. I also probably should have used my Dixie Belle Slick Stick. So the Slick Stick is meant to be put on slick surfaces as a primer. I'm gonna give this vessel a scuff sand still. I don't know if it's gonna do anything. I kind of tried like one little spot, and I don't know that it's really doing anything to the surface of this because it's ceramic, but I'm still gonna do it. We're gonna move forward with the bowl, and my idea for that, I think it's still gonna work out because everything's gonna be really glued together. So we're doing a paper mache bowl here. So I think that's still gonna be fine. I wanted to basically give it a coat of gesso so it wasn't dark, so that it was white underneath as we add on the paper mache layers. Fingers crossed that'll be okay. We're gonna scuff sand this guy down and then add the Slick Stick, and we're gonna see if there's a difference. I literally think that did nothing. You guys, like, I bumped it with my little nail. Like, there's not even a nail on that finger. I bumped it, and actually I think it was this one. There's a tiny little, yeah, I do have a tiny little nail on this one. You can see. Oh my God, so annoying. I added the Slick Stick onto the vessel, and I just love this as a primer. So much better on objects like this. I don't know why I used the gesso on the bowl, but anyways, moving on, I'm gonna start the paper mache process on the bowl. I picked up a pack of white napkins from Aldi. These ones are 2-ply, and while they have a pattern on them, you don't see that at all once the glue is added. I separated the napkin and ripped a portion of it to start adding onto the bowl. And I'm using a mixture of glue and water for the adhesive. This took quite a while to do, and the napkins are extremely thin. You also have to let the glue dry in between each layer. To get that jagged paper mache look, this requires a lot of layers to build up that texture. I'm gonna let this first layer dry and move it back to the wooden stool. The glue is set up for a little bit, and I can cut off that excess dowel. I'm using a flush cut saw to do this to get a nice close cut. This is gonna save me some time in the sanding process. So next I'm taking the pieces out to my garage to sand them down and get that stain off. I've never bleached wood before, but I would imagine you have to remove any sealant or color that was previously on the wood first. I'm using regular household bleach here and pouring it into a little dish. From the research I've done, it looks like people just brush the bleach right onto the wood. They don't water it down at all, so that's what I did. I'm using an old chippy brush and painting it right onto the wood, covering all of the surfaces. The bleach needs time to soak into the wood and work its magic, so let's move back to the vessel. The Olive Atelier one I was inspired by had these decorative twists all around it. So I thought my 4mm macrame cord would give that same look. I used hot glue and added about 6 pieces on, going all the way down. Next, I'm going to paint the surface, and I want there to be texture to it, just like the old world vessels of my inspiration. A few months ago, I did a lime wash wall in my kitchen, and I made my own lime wash paint. I'm using what I have left as my base coat, which is going to add a very natural looking texture to the vessel. I started out using a sponge brush, but I actually really don't like working with these sponges at all. Every time I think I'll give it another shot, I regret it. I kept going with this first layer, but ditched the sponge brush for the second. Anyways, I was applying the lime wash in almost a stippling motion at first, but again, I wasn't loving that. So after I got the whole thing covered, I went back over and kind of smoothed it out. I didn't want to lose the texture and pattern, so I did this unevenly and in crosshatch motions. And now this guy needs to dry. The first layer of our paper mache bowl is dry now. You can see it has a slight texture to it. I'm going to add another layer of the napkin, which will add more texture as we keep adding. This is such a tedious process. back to the vessel while the next layer dries. Lime wash paint dries about 90% lighter than how it goes on, and I thought it was a little bit too light. So I got out my natural pigment and added in some more color to it using natural umber. This time I'm also using a chippy brush to apply it, and I prefer this one any day over the sponge brush. It also gives more texture. I continued with that crosshatch pattern to apply the lime wash all over the vessel. All right, you guys, so I've had some time to think about my projects here that we're making. It's been about a week since I've worked on them, and I kind of have some different ideas of what I want to do. For this tall vessel, first off, while I love the rope that I added on the macrame because you can see that twist, which is really what the inspiration piece had. It was a lot larger, but you could really see that detail of the twisted look on the Olive Atelier pieces. So I have this Prima, redesigned by Prima mold here. And it has a similar like twist piece, or I could do a couple of different ones, but I think that's what I'm gonna go with. And I think I wanna add that on. It's gonna be a little bit bigger for the size vessel that we have here. And I think because once I added paint, the like lime wash paint over top, and we still have more work to do in making this look more aged, this is just gonna show up a lot better because the twist is kind of starting to fade in some areas as the paint is building up on top of it. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take these off. I just hot glued them on. Hopefully it's easy to just take them off, remove them. We are going to use some air dry clay and a mold, reapply it. We're gonna have to let that dry, unfortunately, and then go from there. And then next up on my little bleach wood tested stool piece, I realized I don't think I sanded them down quite enough. This one leg looks perfect. This is exactly the color tone that I was going for with like the bleached wood look. These three, you can see the tone variation. Like this one's definitely still more like orangey red. This one really looks like bleached wood. So I'm gonna sand them down a little bit more, add another layer of the bleach. And then for the top part, I definitely didn't sand this down nearly well enough because you can see all of these lines and streaks from where there was still stain. I thought the bleach might help make that part lighter as well, and I think it did to some extent, and it still looks aged, but I think it just like having it striped like that, it's not the look I was going for. And lastly, our paper mache bowl. I love the way this is looking. I love the texture on it. I think we could get there by adding more layers of the, what was I using, napkins on this, but it's taking so long and there's so much dry time in between each singular layer that I would be here forever and I would not get this video finished in time. My thought here, also after looking at the inspiration images a little bit more from Olive Atelier, I noticed their paper mache bowls are very organic looking. So I'm gonna bust out my instant paper mache and we're gonna add this on top. I think that's gonna end up looking way more like the inspiration piece. And I mean, we're still gonna have to wait for this one to dry before we can like paint it again as well. So both of these I'm gonna have to wait to like do anything further after they dry tomorrow. It's Friday night now, but I think it's just gonna end up looking so much better and I'll actually get it finished. I got the macrame off the vessel, smoothed out where the hot glue was, and now I need to make all of the air dry clay twist pieces to add on. I'm using my Das air dry clay. I really like this brand. Sculpey is another really good option, and then this redesigned by Prima silicone mold. You always want to dust a mold with cornstarch before adding in the clay so it doesn't stick and you get a clean design. These molds are a little different from the IOD ones I like to use since they do not have that micro rim, which allows you to easily remove any excess clay. So for molds like this, I take a palette knife or something like it and run it along the top of the mold to remove the clay. I didn't get a great clip of how I was adding these pieces on, but I cut each end at an angle, and that way it was a little easier to connect them together. Then I used my Titebond glue to attach them to the vessel. I added them on wet, otherwise they would have dried flat. There was some slight shrinkage while the clay dried, but I was able to fill that in with a tiny bit of spackle and you can't even tell. While the clay dries, I'm adding the new paper mache onto the bowl. I love this stuff. All you have to do is add water until you have a clay-like consistency and apply it to your piece. I I used my spatula to apply the paper mache mixture at first. That way I wasn't making a complete mess of my hands at this stage. Then once I had the bowl covered, I used my fingers dipped in water to start smoothing it out and removing those obvious lines from the spatula. Again, we need to set this aside to dry. This time it took a few days to dry completely. The dry time is going to vary depending on how thick you layer the paper mache on. A thin layer will dry much quicker. So let's move back to the stool now. I added the second coat of bleach to it and I'm happy with the color now. The bottom side of the legs isn't quite dry, but that's okay, we can still move on. Something I didn't work out though at the beginning was adding the legs back on. I've filled in those screw holes and I didn't want to see screws on top. I also didn't really need to add the numbers since I sanded them off of the seat part. It did help though to know which ones belong next to each other since they have different angles. But I applied wood glue to the bottom of each leg and added it to the seat. You want to apply enough glue here so that it squeezes out on the sides. This is going to create a nice suction with the wood, especially since we aren't going to use any screws. Then I added some clamps to hold the legs on tight while the glue dries. Okay, it's the next day and my clay has dried. You can't even tell where I added in some spackle to fill in any gaps. Now I need to paint the clay sections with the lime wash paint so it all has that same color. This was actually pretty difficult. The lime wash did not want to get into all of the clay dents and divots. I kept trying different style paintbrushes to get it on. So when you use lime wash paint, each layer you apply slightly changes the color and also the texture of the surface. Since I was getting this layer of the lime wash on the sections that were already painted as well, I went back over the whole thing randomly applying the lime wash so you wouldn't see those stripe sections around the clay where it was a little bit darker. I don't think this part mattered because we're going to cover up the whole thing again anyways. However, you could also stop here and I think it looks beautiful just as it is. It was just too gray for me and didn't have enough age to it, so I went on to the next step. I'm using some acrylic paints and a sponge to layer on and get more of that aged patina. The first color I'm using is Cinnamon by Folk Art. The olive Atelier pieces I was referencing had a terracotta looking base with some light aged areas on top. Another feature of lime wash is when it gets wet, the paint is reactivated. At first I was trying to avoid this and not wet my sponge too much, but I actually really liked how the areas were looking where I had wet the sponge a little bit more. Making anything look aged is a trust the process type of project. Speaking of, code word for the giveaway is trust. But projects like this usually always look kind of crazy and like a hot mess before they look good. There were plenty of times where I was seriously questioning what I was doing and I thought I had ruined the vessel. But I kept going, kept layering on the paint until I was happy with how it looked. It was difficult to get the sponge into all of the little crevices of the clay section, so I would use a detail brush or a chippy brush to apply the paint where needed. As I moved down the vessel, I started to add in some darker areas using Nutmeg and Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel. This started to add more depth to the piece. And again, that lime wash base layer helps to add some really interesting effects to the paint as it all dries. You could stop here as well, and this version is also beautiful and looks like aged terracotta, but it was a little bit too orange for me. So I decided to add in some more light tan over top. It really doesn't look tan as it dries, it's starting to look more gray, but I think this helps tone it down and bring it a little bit closer to my inspiration. I kept going back and forth with the darker and the lighter colors in hopes that it all melts together and look a little less splotchy than the previous version. While I liked how aged it looked, it was a little bit too busy. However, I didn't want any area to look too solid of one color, so I also took my sponge with the brown colors and very lightly dabbed it over here and there just to tie everything together. Now, you guys have to tell me which version you prefer, but let's take a look at how all 3 projects turned out. Even though I was really questioning how this would turn out, I'm so glad I kept on going with it. It is stunning and really gives that old world and aged vibe. You can style this simply like I have here with just an olive branch, or add in some pampas grass for even more of that boho look. I had planned on painting the papier-mâché bowl, but after it dried, I loved that natural variation in the tone, and I didn't think I'd be able to recreate that with paint. While the stool is really simple, I wanted to share how you can find an item at the thrift store with a great shape and turn it into something that works for you to give it a new life. Check my description box for the playlist and keep watching all month long for tons of creativity and upcycling inspiration. Don't forget to collect the code words as well. See you next week!